Yuki Tsunoda has been kind of left out in the entire process with Sergio Perez and whether or not he will remain in Red Bull for the remainder of 2024. However, the Japanese driver has now received a significant boost from his current team boss Peter Bayer as pressure continues to ramp on Perez and Verstappen amid the slump of performance of the RB20. With the Austrian team not being the most dominant force out there anymore, and with every point mattering now that there are at least two teams who can snatch 4 positions away from Red Bull, should Tsunoda be paired with Verstappen, and is this a move that the 3-time world champion would approve of? It's safe to say that Tsunoda has been driving the season of his career in a car that started the season quite badly, but nevertheless he managed to score 22 points in the first half of the season with it. His results were consistently good, and while the last 8 races saw Ricciardo neutralize the damage to Tsunoda, and being far more competitive than in the first 6 venues of 2024, he is still 10 points ahead of the Aussie, and has been considered as a potential candidate for other teams as well. Red Bull have shut the door to these talks quickly because they've continued the collaboration with Tsunoda for at least 1 more year, but it's now obvious that they would have to commit much more and promote him to the Austrian team if they want to see him remain within the camp in the following period. And this is something that his current team CEO Peter Bayer says will happen sooner rather than later, as Bayer feels like the consistency that Tsunoda has showcased in the past 14 races is something that shouldn't be overlooked by Red Bull. The Austrian team has undoubtedly dropped the ball with the mid-season development, and with Verstappen admitting that there might not be more performance out of the car even though he hoped for more, now it's obvious that they will need a strong pairing in Red Bull so that they will be able to attack the Constructors' Championship in a more stable way from 2025. Elaborating on Tsunoda's chances to be promoted to Red Bull, Bayer said, Helmut Marko said it himself, one swallow does not make a summer. That means that if Yuki continues to race this consistently at this level, he will be eligible for a seat at Red Bull Racing. The situation in Red Bull is very interesting because they have a lot of talent on their hands, but with the decision to move forward with Perez and ultimately bring a version of the RB20 closer to the one of the beginning of the season, they've raised some eyebrows among F1 experts and pundits as to whether or not they're serious contenders for the Constructors' Championship. What is also very interesting is that Tsunoda has received unexpected support from Daniel Ricciardo, who is a very serious contender for Red Bull's seat and was reportedly already promoted on Sunday after Spa's disastrous weekend for Perez, only for Red Bull to go on and change the narrative on Monday and commit to the Mexican driver. When talking about his teammate, Ricciardo had a lot of praise for the progress that the Japanese driver has showcased in the past couple of races, saying, I think now he's definitely getting the credit he deserves. Probably a lot of people still think about his first year where he made a lot of mistakes and it felt like his adjustment into Formula 1. It just felt like maybe he couldn't really adjust and it was all a bit too much. Tsunoda has definitely grown a lot in the last couple of years. So yes, he is fast. Do I rate him? I do. He's probably becoming a bit more aware of his attitude as well, and I think he's doing a really good job. This is quite a rarity, and it goes to show that Tsunoda is really the driver who we feel he is, but the recognition from Red Bull just doesn't seem to be there in the first place. He wasn't considered for this seat amid all of the talks that Perez might be replaced, as Ricciardo and Lawson were the only names that started to circulate in the paddock in terms of drivers who would receive the chance of having the privilege of being Verstappen's teammates. This is something that is a blessing and a curse at the same time, as explained by Marko, but nevertheless, Tsunoda feels ready for the challenge, and stated that he's not afraid of the challenge that the Dutchman would throw at him in 2025. Elaborating on his chances of driving in Red Bull in the future and how that will impact his career, Tsunoda said, I'm feeling ready compared to obviously the last 3 years to fight against the top few teams in higher positions, even with Max or whatever. But in the end, Red Bull are the ones who are going to decide, and it's not one of those things I can control. So I'm just focusing on what I have to do in the next few races. Tsunoda has also talked about the talks that he had with Helmut Marko and how important they are for his career in Red Bull, because while he's now driving the season of his career, the entire Formula One world knows that this is not the last destination for Tsunoda, and definitely not the place where he wants to end his career. Now that Honda and Aston Martin will join their forces from 2026 onwards, and Alonso's manager has hinted towards a potential retirement in 2026, it's safe to assume that if Verstappen doesn't decide to drop the biggest bombshell in the F1 world and leave Red Bull, Tsunoda would be one of the leading candidates for this place. Therefore, it would be a missed and rude opportunity for Red Bull too, because they would be losing a solid product in Tsunoda, while the second seat in the team would be wide open for a competitive driver of his caliber. And when talking about this situation and how it evolved with the talks between him and Marko, Tsunoda said, "The talks haven't been clear ones, it's just casual chat in the hospitality and it just happens like that, but also Red Bull is not rushing it. Perez's contract was announced very soon too, and he might perform really well, so if he does that, they don't have a reason to change their drivers. In the end, what they are doing is a good thing for Checo because they don't want to create any pressure, and that is definitely fair, and also for myself. They want me to drive and focus on what I'm doing right now. So we haven't had serious conversations yet." Be that as it may, Tsunoda is now slowly but surely maturing into a driver who Red Bull should never turn a blind eye to because of his talent, and with how the V-Carb has been acting underneath his hands, it's safe to assume that the RB20 or even the RB21 would be a much sweeter ride for him too. After all, we've seen that Perez has been prone to mistakes, and Horner is now bugged as to why the Mexican driver cannot return to his old form, the one that he showcased in the first 5 races of the season. But nevertheless, one of the biggest threats for Tsunoda's future in Red Bull isn't just Ricciardo, it's Liam Lawson. While it's strange to think that a driver like Lawson would get the priority over Tsunoda if they are to be promoted to Red Bull next to Verstappen, the competitiveness and the fierce nature of Tsunoda might not be something that the Austrian team would want next to Verstappen at this stage of the team's crisis. By extending Perez's contract, Red Bull have made one thing clear: they care a lot more about the Drivers' Championship than the Constructors, and having a driver who won't be a risk to Verstappen from his own garage will help them secure this championship on a much swifter basis. To say that Tsunoda would outperform Verstappen in the same machinery is definitely silly to believe in, but regardless of this, the Japanese driver will prove a very tough nut to crack, and he will drive for himself only, not for the team's needs. Therefore, Verstappen will definitely think twice before he gets to choose who he wants as a teammate, not just for the remainder of 2024, as this question is already answered, but also for 2025. Tsunoda has proven time after time that he can be quite competitive, and now that Verstappen is not even certain to continue his tenure in Red Bull and see his contract all the way through to 2028, this is the man that might be given the baton to be the leader of the team in a very wild turn of events. With all this in mind, do you think that Tsunoda is ready for promotion in Red Bull? And if so, do you think that he will be a real challenge for Verstappen and his championship quest from 2025 onwards? Let us know in the comments below.